Greetings, my dear friends. This is Chax once again with a new episode of Chax Simplifies. In my last episode, we discussed the geopolitics of Corona, a Mahamari, as we would call it in Hindi, a pandemic, an upheaval of no mean size and stature. Last such major upheaval was the Second World War, quite some time back, right? The European powers, the colonial powers, they saw that end. Those empires collapsed, and a new, more equitable world emerged from here. There were a number of conferences like the Bretton Woods, the Malta Conference, that went into discussions of how the new world would look like between, at that time, the five major powers. Many world institutions, the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, the WHO, the ILO, they all emerged from many of these conferences and conferences thereafter. At the same time, military military also emerged, military organizations like the NATO, the CENTO, and also emerged the origins of the Cold War. The world got divided into two poles: the NATO, led by the US, and the Warsaw Pact, led by the USSR. By and large, these institutions, these groupings survived and delivered, keeping the world relatively free till about the collapse of the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union suddenly gave rise to an asymmetric world with only one superpower, the United States. This power vacuum was filled very quickly by China. China has its own aspirations, its own geopolitical ambitions, and those it got into the act very quickly. Corona, this year, is one more major such upheaval which is likely to change the world and create a brave new world, as I would like to call it. So, what are these major geopolitical trends, and how does China find itself in the center of the storm? Greater details you will find in my previous video, and I will include a link to that in the description box. Do feel free to visit that video and refresh yourselves. So, effectively, what are the major trends of globalization? Don't forget, globalization is fraught with its own dangers. It has shown itself open and susceptible to, as people call, war by other means. But let's take a look at the broad trends very, very quickly. The financial sector. Nixon started with the petrodollar, and that allowed the world trade to go on denominations only in the US dollar, and therefore the US could print the dollar as much as it likes because it knew there will always be a demand for it. China is using a similar weapon, the weapon of debt, to create its own client states. Somehow, China came into the center of global manufacturing, a participant in almost every global supply chain because of being able to provide low cost labor, world class machinery, and hardly any labor laws to allow world companies to produce in China, make in China. From a perception of Chinese goods being of poor quality, today China can proudly sit at the technological high table. And don't forget, the first country to ever declare the Boeing 737 MAX as dangerous was China. It ensured the Boeing 737 MAX was grounded. Take the IPR and patents Most patents of the 5G are filed by China. The Wuhan lab has been in the process of filing patents ever since the epidemic blew up. China has also been trying its best to dominate and control the seas. Look at its activities in the South China Sea, from creating islands to making it difficult for the South China Sea littorals to do any work, whether it is fishing or oil exploration in the South China Sea. It is trying to do exactly the same by using a client state or trying to create a client state in Iran so as to be able to control the Straits of Hormuz. It is the home to many of the rare earths. And as early as 2010, China started denying these to Japan. The digital world knows only one thing: data and connectivity. Data is the new oil, access and utilization of data, the glue. New age tools like AI, quantum computing make processing and utilization of data very easy. China has leadership in all of them. Chinese apps, Chinese equipment are all believed to have backdoors or the ability to provide the necessary data to its masters in China. TikTok, the world's first truly artificial intelligence based video streaming software, actually controls what you see, and that is Chinese. Similarly, Zoom and the controversy of data leaking to China. China sits at the center of global nuclear terrorism with its client states like North Korea, Pakistan, Iran. There's always a danger that it might fuel Islamic terrorism if any of the nuclear devices fall into the Islamic terrorists. Yet, China managed its perception reasonably well till the corona. It played the victim card brilliantly. It ensured its best were exported to the best institutions globally so as to get to know all that is happening and come back and deliver back in China. It subverted global organizations, the WHO, the UN, for example. Remember, the WHO, as late as 14th of January of this year, said there is no evidence of human to human transmission of corona, while that evidence was staring at our faces even in the month of December. Taiwan raised this issue quite a while back. Similarly, the UN has still not discussed the corona crisis. Well, corona, its handling, has definitely tarnished Chinese reputation. So, if China is at the center of all of this, one must understand a little about China. So, let me spend a minute here. China is probably the only communist state in the world today, the only major communist state in the world. It celebrates its centenary in July 2021. A decade back, it gave itself certain major goals, and in the plenary in 2021, it would like to report success in all those fronts. Some of these goals were double the GDP growth. Well, it's already achieved. It would want to show its control over South China Sea. Achieved. It wanted to show its control over the world's resources. Well, somewhat achieved. It has bought a lot of them in Africa. It has created a number of client states weighed by its debt. It has leadership in high tech. It sits at the high table there. The success of BRI is a step in this direction. However, Hong Kong is a small blot there. There is unrest in Hong Kong. Taiwan is a bigger blot. It still has no timelines for the amalgamation of Taiwan into China. So, what will happen now? Will China be able to report in July 2021 all of these points as having completed and demonstrate to the world and its own people, more importantly, its own people, that hey, our model of benevolent communism, our model of communism with a slight capitalistic bias, is the best model in the world, and therefore the world must follow it. China will undoubtedly do all it can to meet its aims. So, where does that leave us today? It leaves us with the US leadership under threat for the very first time. The US may well turn inward looking for a while to be able to reassert its leadership. China is awake, it's stretching its muscles, but it's also raised hackles all over. Nations are erecting firewalls against the Chinese aggression, whether in the South China Sea or in trade. On the other hand, the European Union does seem to be heading towards a collapse. Will that happen? Is NATO relevant anymore? What happens in Iran? There are rumors that there could be a regime change basically because a lot of top leadership has died. Will that actually happen on ground? There is a power vacuum in the world. Therefore, somebody has to rise to fill this vacuum. Can India do so? Is the question that one has to ask. On the other hand, do you really expect China to sit quiet and say, okay, you guys want to take over, please do? Unlikely. Look at the reality. The world economy is reeling, world industry is stopped, Chinese industry is humming. China is already belligerent. It is showing its aggression everywhere, from South China Sea to as recent as a few days back, where it laid claim to the Mount Everest, if you please. Does Quad see itself as an alternate? Interesting questions, all of them. But one thing is sure, a new world order does seem to be in the offing. So now let's get to India. As we get to India, let's do a very quick SWOT analysis. What are India's strengths? India is the world's largest democracy. It is by and large has the rule of the law, has excellent network connectivity across India, and today is the home to the second largest community of internet users. The data utilization per head in India is significantly large. A young population raring to go, which is all called the demographic dividend. It has established leadership in the IT sector. It is the outsourcing capital of the world. It is the generics capital of the world as far as pharmaceuticals is concerned. Medical tourism is a well-known term applied as far as India is concerned, for sure. It has developed over the last decades industrial complexes across the country, has a large pool of engineers, by and large who can speak English, and gel quite well with the Western culture. India today is self-sufficient in food. It's a large market internally. Labor costs are relatively low. It has at least now a stable and a well-respected leadership, not just internally, but globally. A large professional armed forces to ensure peace and stability. A phenomenal soft power, a power which has not been, really speaking, used as much as it can be, a large economy, a natural strategic ally for the US and the West, something today is very well acknowledged by all concerned, and more importantly, and entrepreneurial culture. Don't forget, as recently as in March, India did not produce a single N95 mask, not a single private personal protective equipment PPE. Today, in less than 2 months, is producing 2 lakh masks a day, over 2 lakh PPE per day, despite the lockdown. Well, it has significant weaknesses as much. There is unemployment in India. You can't deny this. There is significant poverty. We have taken steps, but poverty is there. Red tape, the bane for all that who come to India for any investment. Changing laws occasionally. Corruption, rules, inspections, all of them raise hackles. Not very easy to do business here. But don't forget, in the last few years, we have risen in the ease of doing business, where from a languishing 120 odd to 60 odd today. Significant progress, but much, much more needs to be done. Supply chains, port handling, cargo handling, archaic. Labor laws, the less I speak about it, the better. And a devil that is raising its head recently is the divisive communalism that India seems to be getting into. Well, do we have opportunities? Significant opportunities indeed. The power vacuum is one great, brilliant opportunity that we have as far as global geopolitics is concerned. There is a rising apathy for China and Chinese products. On the other hand, India has generated considerable goodwill from its medical exports as well as its ability to evacuate its own citizens in an evacuation which is unparalleled even in the Second World War. The shifting of industries from China is a nice opportunity. Japan, US have all been trying to do so, and India has made an offer for land based labor and availability of power, an added asset. There is a perception in the world of India's leadership in certain areas, of Indian quality in certain other areas, especially in IT, high tech, healthcare. The current political dispensation is well respected globally, with the Prime Minister Modi at the helm of affairs. This has prompted a reverse brain drain with people, brilliant minds coming back to India. Do we have threats? Of course we do. There are other countries like Vietnam who are quickly off the block and are welcoming foreign investment and the shift from China. Our decision making seems to be slow at times. That perception of red tape, corruption, poor labor laws, buns, the role played by NGOs in stalling important strategic projects even. With the state of corona handling in India today, there is a risk that we may recover later than the rest of the world if this pandemic goes out of hand. So, what is India doing to be able to counter the threats, make use of the opportunities, nullify the weaknesses, and play on the strengths? It has demonstrated to the world its prowess across various domains. I spoke about the largest evacuation since even the First World War. The Vande Bharat, Samudra Setu, the scaling up of export and production of medical equipment supplies to the globe, the near successful handling of the world's largest lockdown ever, utilizing JAM, that is Jandhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, to be able to deliver benefits directly to the poor to a large extent. Good administration, central leadership, and now the gradual lifting of the lockdown. All this has earned praise for India as far as handling of the COVID is concerned, even by the WHO. In keeping up with the principle of never to let a good crisis go waste, India has offered land twice the size of Luxembourg for companies that are leaving China. The states of UP and MP have shut down, or actually speaking, suspended over 46 archaic labor laws and said, hey, these labor laws are suspended for 3 years, come in and invest. It will provide fresh employment opportunities as well as the ability for India to make in India. Massive investments in pharmaceuticals, especially in the API or the active pharmaceutical ingredient that were imported from China, have been made to break this dependency. The manufacturing sector is being kickstarted with the slogan, praise the local, right? Military hardware is a focus area, and there are dedicated defense corridors from Tamil Nadu to UP to Gujarat. India has shored up its strategic oil reserves using this crisis and the low price of oil. Homegrown platforms from the Jandhan, Aadhaar mobile, the Arogya Setu, the RuPay, the Mitro, the Namaste, the Tata CILQ, all this shows how quickly India can respond to a crisis and create world-class software and platforms, right? Externally, also, we have done a few things, and those some places the results are also showing. It has demonstrated leadership, whether it was in the BIMSTEC or in G20 or the recent NAM summit. Its participation in global affairs has increased. The US has included India in the trusted partners which will work for a global prosperity network along with Australia, South Korea, and Japan. This is the new economic vision of the West. The RCEP nations want India to return to the negotiating table and rejoin, and are willing to offer much, much more concessions than they were a little while back. The US has cleared sale of weapon systems and 4 manufacturing plants in the pharmaceuticals sector in just 10 days, something unprecedented so far. Look at the Labour Party in the UK. It has changed its stand on Kashmir. The Twitter war, which was initiated in the Middle East to show India is not a reliable country and is anti-Muslims, came to an end very quickly. India is definitely pushing for the Security Council reforms so that the Security Council can be reconstituted. There are opportunities in the Quad, and all this will compel China on the back foot. The Prime Minister Modi's address on the 12th of May, which laid out a vision of self-reliant India, don't forget, with a global construct, unlike anywhere else, resting on 5 pillars: the pillars of economy, infrastructure, modern systems, demography, supply and demand chains. All this music to the world. Vocal about local is a new push, and reforms with the global aspirations are being spelled out. An economic package of 10%, unprecedented of the GDP, is out. Therefore, India is on the way forward. But then, do we really expect China to do nothing about it? Absolutely not. China has always considered India as its biggest threat, and therefore has been working to keep India at an unstable equilibrium. It will definitely and is using Pakistan, its client state, and others to be able to create internal disturbances and destabilize India. The Sterlite copper smelter in Tamil Nadu is one such episode. Creating of problems for India in the Indian Ocean region, aggressive patrolling, string of pearls, hot borders, and the recent skirmishes, whether it was Nakula in Sikkim or Pegongso Lake in Ladakh. It will also start denying India resources quite soon. Don't forget, Al Qaeda and ISIS have already India on their crosshairs. So, where do you think we go from here? My view is that we are very well poised to make a place for ourselves in the 21st century. All the necessary ingredients are all here. The vision, decisive leadership, what industry needs from land, labor, laws, liquidity, and capital, all provided for. A techno entrepreneurial expertise, leadership in IT and high tech areas, a manufacturing complex which is near world class, a huge demographic dividend, and a soft power which is significant yet not fully utilized. What India needs is a question of will. Will we? So, folks, we continue to live in very interesting times. Time will tell whether how successful we are as we go along. If you have liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and click on the subscribe button. Your comments, your suggestions will be very welcome. And of course, don't forget to share my video in your networks. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.